Hello, this is Bill Webb, aka Billy Indiana. Today I'm going to do a 3x3x3 review for Red Rising, which is by Jamey, Stegmaier, and Alexander Schmidt, recently put out by Stonemaier Games. I'm going to talk to you about three things that I really enjoy about Red Rising, three things that I think either I don't appreciate or other players might not enjoy, and then give you three recommendations for other games that you might really like if you like Red Rising or vice versa. So if you're interested, stick around. Here's an overhead shot of the game and quite a few of the components. If you want to see the components in more detail and learn a little bit more about what's in the game, check out the unboxing that I did for Red Rising, and I'll link that here up above. But I'll just give you a quick overview of a few things. You've got the house tiles here for each player. You can play from 1 to 6 players, and each player will be a part of a particular house. And then there's the sort of turn order and player aid card here for each of those houses as well. You've got the wolf head with the helium tokens inside. You've got the multi-purpose cards that are the focus of the game. And then this information over here, these materials are all for playing solo. So I won't go into that. In fact, I plan on recording a solo playthrough and a quick overview of how you play. But these are the things that you use for solo. Comes with a score book as well. You've got the sovereign token, which is something you're vying for throughout the game. You've got the die that you roll for a certain mode of play. When you draw a card, you roll the die to see what your bonus is going to be. You've got the first player token, which is the Moon Luna token here. And then every player is going to have a card holder. So I've taken one for the purple faction here, Minerva. And then the tokens here, you would have a fleet token here, and then 10 of these institute tokens for each player that's playing, and they're all in the player's own colors. And you can see that the cards just stack nicely in the holder here. So that's a quick overview of what the game has. Again, you can see more detail in the unboxing if you're curious. The basic idea of the game is that you're going to play until certain end game parameters are met. And you're keeping track of accumulating tokens here in the Institute. You're keeping track of moving your fleet token up this fleet track here across the top of the board. And you're also keeping track of collecting these helium tokens. And when any single player has accomplished 2 of those 3 things, or when any combination of players has accomplished all 3, that signals the end of the game. You finish that round, and then you add up your points. Now the cards, like I said, are multi-purpose cards. And so if you look at a particular card here, for example, you can see for this card, we've got over here some little color symbols to show what kind of other cards this one might go with. You see here by the little rectangle with an arrow, a function that this card has when you deploy it to the board. And then you see down here at the bottom, special scoring abilities that this card has depending on what other cards you have in your hand at the end of the game. And then it's base scoring up here. And they're all part of 14 different factions from the Red Rising fictional world created by Pierce Brown, based on the first 3 books in the Red Rising trilogy. So throughout the game, you're going to be playing cards for the actions that they have, collecting cards into your hand, and then at the end of the game, once those end game conditions are met, you get points based on what your tokens, how many tokens you have in the Institute, what your fleet track score is, how many helium tokens you have, the base points on each of the cards, and then also the additional points you earn for the way you've comboed the cards together. So if you've ever played Fantasy Realms, that is the card game that this was sort of based on in terms of its mechanisms. This is much more complex than Fantasy Realms, and yet it's still a pretty simple game. So if you're curious about how to play with more detail, like I said, I do plan to put together an overview with a partial playthrough, probably a solo playthrough or solo partial playthrough to show you those techniques as well, so you can keep your eye out for that. Click on that bell icon if you want a notification when that video comes out. For today, though, I want to tell you what did I like about it, what did I not like about it or could see other people maybe not appreciating, and then 3 other games that I think if you enjoy Red Rising or if you enjoy those other games, you would probably enjoy the other. So first, what did I like? Well, the first thing I'll mention is that to me, this game is gorgeous. So we've got, I think the cover is brilliant. The art here, the art on the cards itself is incredible. The components are really high quality, as is very typical of Stonemaier Games. And so people that don't know anything about the books, that don't know anything about the story, I think can still be drawn in by the art of the cards, the art of these tiles, the art on the board, Just it's a beautiful game in my opinion, and so that is one thing that I really found attractive. I've read the books, or at least I'm almost finished with the third book in that first trilogy, and so I know a lot about the characters. But even without knowing the characters, looking through the cards, the art on the cards is just really incredible. This is the collector's edition, so these tokens are metal instead of plastic, and some of the cards that are from the gold house have actual gold foiling in the cards, and there's a few differences if you get the retail version versus this collector's edition version, but either way, the card has really great components. So that is the first thing that I really enjoyed about this game. The second thing that I really enjoyed about Red Rising is that it's really easy to learn. While there is a little bit more than maybe a very beginner's game, it's not quite as simple as Fantasy Realms. It's still quite easy. Every time you take a turn, you're basically going to, in most cases, play a card to the board, and then you're going to pick up a different card from the board that's in a different column. There's 4 columns here, so if I slide some of these things off to the side, you can see that there is a column for the Institute, Luna, Mars, and Jupiter. And so if you play a card into Luna, then you're going to pull a card off of one of the other 3. And whichever column you pull the card off of, you're going to get that bonus. So you would get that if you pull one off of Jupiter, you're going to move up the fleet track. If you pull one off of Mars, you're going to take a helium token. If you pull one off of Luna, you're going to take this sovereign token, and you're going to activate the special ability that your house has that's listed here on the house tile. If you take one off the Institute, then you're going to put your cubes here, your tokens, on the Institute, and they'll be worth points at the end of the game. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, there's a little bit more detail, but there's not a whole lot. It's a pretty simple game in terms of the strategy and the mechanisms of how you play. Now, to get good at the game, you do need to get familiar with the cards, but it's pretty simple to teach, pretty simple to learn, and it's a pretty quick game, which I appreciate as well. I think the box says 40 to 60 minutes. I've played most of my solo games in around 30 minutes after the first couple, once I was able to get used to it. Played with my wife the first time through, probably about 45 to 60 minutes. So I think if you play with people that are familiar and you have a lower player count, getting under a 60-minute game is going to be pretty easy for you. So all of those things I think are really attractive. Easy to learn, easy to teach, and fairly short playing time, and you can play from 1 to 6 players. So it's got the solo, you can play as well at 2 players, and you can play all the way up to 6, which I haven't played with more than 2 yet, so I can't speak too much to that, but I really appreciate the simplicity of the game, and yet there's depth to it. The more I play it, the more I enjoy it, and the more I'm able to combo the cards together better. So I see a lot of replayability in it. The third thing that I really like is when you are able to get those cards in combo at the end of the game to really score a great combination of points because of the way you've collected them over the game, you feel really clever. And I just love that feeling of getting to the end of the game and realizing, wow, this one goes with this one, and if I use the power of this card to change the color or the name, I can get this combo and earn more points. And just being able to put those cards together just makes you feel really clever. And as you're going through the game, you've got that puzzle to figure out, and how can I play this card to get the action, and will I be able to get it back, or is it worth playing that one to get this one? And there's ways to manipulate the cards, moving them around column to column as you deploy and use the function on the cards. So just so many things that make you feel clever as you're playing, and then especially at the end of the game when you see the combos you've created. So those are the 3 things that I really like about Red Rising. Now, what are the 3 things that I wasn't so fond about, or I could see other people maybe not being crazy about? So the first thing that I didn't really care for really doesn't have anything to do with the game itself. It's kind of a nitpicky thing, but as nice as this game is, and as much as I appreciate the components, I've stuck different styrofoam pieces down into these wells because to me the cards just don't fit into them nicely. This one has a smaller sized well over here for the smaller cards that are used for the solo play, and then this one has the bigger one. But the way this is shaped, the big cards fit down below, but then the ones above just kind of slide all over the place. And then over here, the small ones fit, but then the opening above it, the bigger cards kind of fall into that and don't just sit nice and level. And so I've put styrofoam in there to make them fit better. So it's kind of a picky thing. It doesn't have anything to do with the gameplay, but it's something I was a little bit disappointed by. I feel like the insert could have been better designed for such a collector's item game. And then some people have complained that the colors, like the blue and the green, look pretty similar, and the gold and the copper look pretty similar, and the red and the violet look pretty similar. The red is pretty pink. To me, I don't think that really matters. You can easily tell them apart when they're side by side, or at least I can. And most of the time, it doesn't really matter. That's not a key part of the game. On the cards, the colors are more important, and you can clearly tell what the colors are on the cards. So I didn't find that to be a problem at all for me. It was just mainly the insert design. So I know it's kind of nitpicky, but that is something that I was a bit disappointed by. The second thing I could see some players maybe not appreciating is there are a deck of, I think it's 120 or maybe even a little more than 120 cards to go through. And especially if you're playing solo or 2 players, and maybe even 3, although I haven't tried it, you'll not get through the full deck. And so you're not going to see all the cards, and you may be just waiting and searching for that card that you really want, or that combination of cards that you really want. And if you're not able to flex and adjust your plan, then you might get frustrated that the cards you really want to see never come out. And sometimes it's a specific card, sometimes it's just a color. The last time I played a solo game, I really needed blue cards and they just weren't coming out. And so I can see some players, if they're not wanting to be flexible and wanting to adjust their plan as they go, that may be frustrating for them. For me, I like it. I see it as a challenge. If I start to see that technique or that strategy falling apart, I try to see how can I shift and do the next best strategy, or how can I adjust. But especially, I think, as you're first learning, it may be frustrating when you're trying to figure out the combos and you can see a good one and you just can't find the cards. The last thing that I think could be a con for some players is I could see this being a little bit AP prone, especially in the first few rounds of play. There's a lot of reading, there's a lot of text on the cards, not compared to a lot of games, I guess, but there is a fair bit of text, and you've got to read the text on the cards to know what the deploy action is, and then what the in-game ability is, and then some of them have both an in-game function and then also an in-game scoring. And so there's a fair bit that you have to read, and there's, like I said, 120 or so cards, so there's a lot to read and there's a lot to think about. And I could see, especially when you're first learning the game and you're not familiar with the cards, players being very AP prone and could maybe drag the game out, especially if some of the players know the cards well and they can predict things well and kind of know what they're looking for, and the others are just learning it for the first time. So I could see that being kind of a hang up for some players, either because they don't want to read it, because it is very language dependent. You have to be able to read those cards, or maybe they're playing with younger players who understand the flow of the game because it's pretty simple, but struggle reading. I could see that being an issue and potentially leading to that sort of analysis paralysis problem. So those are the 3 things that I could see some people may be struggling with or not appreciating about Red Rising. Now, my overall view of the game. I've played it 7 or 8 times solo, and I've played with my wife. And the game, for me, every time I play it, I just want to keep playing again. Last time I sat down, I was going to just play a quick solo game, and then after I was like, I want to do better than that, so I played again. Then I was done with that. I'm going to try one more time. For me, it's been a bit addictive. I really enjoy it. And part of that is, I admit, from my knowledge of the characters in the books. I enjoy the books, I enjoy the storyline, and it's really fun for me. And I think this is kind of a bonus pro for players who would play this game who know the stories. You know the characters, and when you know them, then you can see how their abilities and who they pair up with to combo and the scoring actually is thematic. If you don't know the story and you don't know the people and the characters, then that's not going to really make any sense to you, but it makes me smile when I see a card and I'm like, oh yeah, this card needs to go with that one. It makes total sense. Or, oh, that's the function of that card. Yeah, that's exactly what that character would do. And so the more you know about the storyline, the more appreciation you'll have for it. And so for me, being a fan of both the books and now the game, every time I play, I just want to play again. And it's growing on me even more and more every time I play. So for me, it's definitely one that I can see getting a ton of play out of. I'm really enjoying it a lot. It's kind of rapidly moving up in my rankings of games, and I really appreciate it a lot. So even though I do see a few things that may hold some players back, for me, it's a big hit. So I very much appreciate it. So now for the recommendations. If you have played Red Rising and you're wondering, well, what other games have this same kind of a vibe might I enjoy? Or if you're considering to play Red Rising and you're thinking, well, what other games might I have played that have something in common that would help me know whether Red Rising is going to be right for me? So I've got 3 recommendations for you. And the first one is the obvious one. But if you haven't played Fantasy Realms, and they've just put out recently the Cursed Horde expansion, this Fantasy Realms game is very similar in terms of this is purely a card game. There's no board or any other features, but in this card game, you're doing the similar thing of collecting cards that go together in combo, and you're getting the base score plus the advantage score at the bottom. And while they don't really have a deploy action, there are some other actions on the cards, like this card would clear the effects of those cards or blank the effects of those cards. And then I haven't had a chance to try the Cursed Horde expansion. I just got it a few days ago, but just looking it over briefly, it adds not only some more factions into, or card types into this collection, there's also some strategy cards where you can lose some points to the final score, but it gives you an advantage in the moment of the game. So I'm excited to try this expansion, and I think it adds a little more depth, where Fantasy Realms is fairly significantly easier to play, and easier, even though Red Rising is very easy, this is even simpler. I think this adds a bit more depth, so I'm excited to try it. So that would be the obvious pick. Another game that if you like Red Rising, or if you like Fantasy Realms, then Red Rising and Fantasy Realms have a lot in common. The next one might not be quite so obvious why I see connections, but it's one that my family really loves, and that is Seven Wonders. Now, it isn't the same in terms of comboing the cards for scoring in this way, but it is the same in the sense that the cards that you see, because in this game you're card drafting, so you're picking a card and passing it and picking it, passing it. Now you don't do that picking and passing thing here, but there is a common pool of cards, and you do have to think about, like in this game, how you have to think about, well, I want this card, but I don't want them to have that card. It's similar here. You think, well, if I play this down here, the opponents now can take that card. And I've seen them taking a lot of cards that would combo well with that. So there's that similar thing there of wanting to be careful about what you play in the draft of Seven Wonders and what you play to the board in Red Rising. And the other thing is that this is very card based, while you do have wonder boards and money, and there's some other features to it like there is to Red Rising. The base of the play is cards and comboing the cards of, oh, if I get this card as I'm developing my world here of my Seven Wonders, this one will allow me to get the next one at the next level for free. And if I get these two, then it's going to help me to combo to develop and build a wonder. So there's some combo situations that don't exactly work in the same way, but I see a lot of similarities in terms of the things that I like about Red Rising, I also like about Seven Wonders. So that's the second game I would recommend or make a connection to, comparing to Red Rising. And then the last one, also maybe a little unusual at first glance, but one that I do think has some nice comparisons, and that is Dale of Merchants. And Dale of Merchants is by Stonemaier Games, and it's by Sammy Laxo. And this game is a sort of card, not really exactly drafting, but deck building. You're kind of drafting the cards off of a pool, off a river that's flowing with new cards coming out, and so you're competing on those cards, and you're comboing the cards together, and the cards have factions where their powers can overlap and fit together nicely. And it's very thematic in the sense of, if you're playing the chameleons, for instance, or the lemurs or the owls, their characters actually fit with the actions that their cards give, kind of like the characters in the red faction or the red house of Red Rising have certain actions that kind of fit their personality, their cast, and the golds have personality characteristics that play well. It's similar to that here. And again, like I said, with the card powers, you have a card here that allows you to, you deploy it, and then it gets you to maybe draw some more cards or play additional cards or pull cards into your hand or decrease or increase the cost of another card. But then the same thing, you're not just deploying it, so it's multi-purpose cards in Dale of Merchants as well, where not only are you deploying it for its action sometimes, but you can also then play it to a stall and use it for scoring points. And so it's multi-purpose cards. So another thing that I see in common between Dale of Merchants and Red Rising. So you might like Dale of Merchants, you might like Seven Wonders, and you probably will like Fantasy Realms if you like Red Rising. So those are 3 recommendations I have for you. Hopefully that was helpful. I hope you appreciated my thoughts on the game Red Rising, a game that I'm growing to love more and more with every play. Like I said, I hope to put together a partial playthrough and a solo playthrough or a partial playthrough to illustrate more thoroughly how the game plays and to let you watch it in action. So keep your eyes out for that if you're interested. But if you appreciated this video, I'd love it if you'd click on the like button down below, and it would be terrific if you'd subscribe to the channel. If you've played Red Rising, you have questions for me about Red Rising or one of the other 3 games that I've recommended, leave some comments down below and I'd be glad to get back with you. As always, thanks for watching. This is Billy, Indiana, signing off.